Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And next Thursday, we're having some local elections in parts of the country. And Reform UK are really going for it, as they are likely to struggle more in a few years if the Labour government bring their promised changes online. The next year or so may be Reform UK's golden age, and they want to capitalise on it. But they've also claimed that in order to appeal to more moderate voters, they are vetting candidates and have got absolutely no time for racists. Well, if that's the case, why are so many of their candidates idolising Hitler, posting extremely offensive material attacking both Muslims and Jews, and posting messages threatening violence against British populations, the like of which last summer's riots delivered? And these are current candidates. They're not ones who were dropped when their social media history was exposed. These are the ones who actually passed the vetting process, and it makes you wonder how monstrous you had to be to fail it. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So I'm going to go over some of the examples of the truly depraved hate of a whole range of British people expressed by the so-called party of patriotism. But first, I want to reflect on how extraordinary this is, because when Reform UK Chair Zia Yusuf and the leader Nigel Farage insisted that they were going to take the vetting of candidates seriously from now on after, it caused them problems during the general election, I did raise an inquiring eyebrow. See, there are only so many types of people even willing to go out campaigning for a political party, any political party, let alone be a candidate. It takes a lot of time. You open yourself up to a lot of rejection on the doorstep, and that's putting it politely sometimes. You need to be really committed to do it regularly. You need to give up a lot of your time and energy. And it can be very, it can be very deflating at times. And so as if you're an activist, you can dip in and out. But as a candidate, you've got to be on the campaign trail all the time, right? So although you might get the odd lazy sod in the mix who ends up somehow becoming a candidate and then somehow winning, by and large, you're talking about people who are really committed to the cause. So there's Nigel Farage insisting that his party doesn't tolerate racists and that he's going to vet all candidates properly. Then you think about the profile of someone so committed to Reform UK that they will go out campaigning as their second job. Really hard to do a Venn diagram for that, isn't it? See, normally you imagine one circle of people committed to a party, another circle of people who would pass that party's vetting. And then where they overlap, that's your candidates. Not really much overlap for Reform UK if your vetting is going to rule out racists, is it? Their most committed supporters are very definitely racist and almost always lacking in the self-awareness to recognise their own racism, which means they often share it publicly. See, Nigel Farage knows what he can say in public and what he can't. Not so much the wider membership, right? Something has to give, I thought. And indeed it has. On Twitter, Reform Party UK Exposed, really good account for identifying Reform UK candidates. They've been pointing out lots of them around the country with their public views, which are, shall we say, a little bit questionable. And Hope Not Hate have now compiled a bit of a list of some of the extreme views shared by active Reform UK candidates. Not members, not activists, actual candidates that passed the vetting. Some of the worst are plying their trade in my hometown of Doncaster. It'd be a very bad day indeed if I wake up next Friday to find I've got Andrea Jenkins as my mayor and Reform UK somehow running Doncaster Council. Because there's a particular problem with Reform UK winning executive powers at the local level. See, they benefit politically from people's lives being bad. They blame the government, they'll blame immigrants mostly, or people they claim are immigrants, right? Because they're not sufficiently Anglo-Saxon. So it's not in the interests of a Reform UK MP or mayor or councillor to actually make anyone's life better. In fact, they profit by actively making it worse. Could you imagine if life got better in Clacton over the next few years? Farage would struggle to win his own seat back. So they will just continue to blame immigrants and the government whilst not lifting a finger to actually help the people they're supposed to be helping. In this way, Reform UK are a much bigger threat to their own voters than the Conservatives ever were. The Conservatives at least like to be seen to be doing something to improve people's lives. But it also seems to be the case that Farage's so-called vetting either still isn't in operation or has a very low bar set. See, let's take a look at some of the features, although I'll leave the full gory details in the description below rather than feature it all here. So one Doncaster candidate who promoted the idea that Hitler should have killed Muslims instead of Jews, or maybe they mean as well as, because another candidate for the part of Doncaster I was actually born in pushes the Jewish world order conspiracy theories. So although the far right in Britain and America, you tend to think of them at the moment not really letting their anti-Semitism out these days, because they're happy that the only Jewish state is carrying out an operation of ethnic cleansing on a essentially Muslim population, although they never seem to make much of the fact that there's a strong Christian population in Palestine. But nonetheless, although they pretend to be against anti-Semitism in the interest of gathering more allies for their much more high priority Islamophobia, it's worth remembering there's real fundamental monocultural elements here. That means they basically hate anyone who could not clearly stand out as Anglo-Saxon. Not even white. It's not even about skin colour. White people, no, they will absolutely racially abuse the Irish as well, for example. No, Anglo-Saxon. And even that's a bit too broad for some of them, because at least one of these candidates seems to think that even being Anglo-Saxon's not enough to be considered worthy of respect because you might be a woman, right? So Anglo-Saxon men. Presumably not trans men, though. As well as extreme racism and fascist ideology, there are also explicit hopes for violence from some of these candidates against British communities. One candidate wanted to drop nuclear bombs on Britain in the hope that maybe it would take out the odd Muslim. Doesn't seem concerned about the collateral damage of this. Another who openly called for more of the same sort of violence we saw during the riots last summer. And I say again, these are not people who tried to become candidates. They're not candidates who've been deselected when their views were exposed, somehow bypassing what Farage insists is the best vetting process of any party. No, these are candidates, and they're candidates right now. The ballot papers are being printed. Their names are alongside the Reform UK banner, with views like this having been expressed openly some time ago. Nazis, fascists, misogynists, Islamophobes, anti-Semites, terrorists. The worst features you could find in anyone's soul distilled into beings of pure hate and absolutely no brains at all. And if Reform UK do have a genuine vetting process, that means all of these views were known about and their candidacies were still approved. So Nigel Farage knows that his candidates have these extreme and provably dangerous views. His vetting process, if it's even real, only exists so he can tell people there's a system in place to stop racists standing for the party. So voters will go, oh, great, nice one, I can vote for them. They're not racist after all. If any voters find out that racists are actually standing for the party, well, that's too bad. But he will hope that most don't come across this news, which, let's face it, is hardly been plastered all over the mainstream media. And they will think, oh, because there's a vetting process, it's safe to vote Reform. Just like some people think it's safe to read stuff in the mainstream newspapers because they're not allowed to publish lies. Yeah, they are. And the danger of Reform UK doing well, it's not just that it gives the media more excuses to report on what will be good clickbait for them, but it allows people to hold the same views and to think that they're more mainstream. They will see someone who calls for the literal extermination of Muslims in their own land being elected and think that the general public also approve of those views. Whereas actually most people will be voting for them not knowing about those views. We saw this in the Brexit referendum. Everyone says, oh, Brexit wasn't about racism. But the racists thought it was about racism. And the racists saw it as a validation of their racist view. So before that Brexit referendum, racism had been going down a bit in the UK. Because people were realising it's not in tune with society's views. All of a sudden, they thought it was mainstream. They stood up again. And there was a clearly documented increase in physical attacks, as well as verbal attacks on certain minorities after that time. The same will happen here. Really important, if you have a vote in one of these contests next Thursday, because a lot of people, I think, over the last few years, we've been sort of voting to send a message, ahead of the general election. That's sort of over now. But there's still a really good reason to make sure that Reform UK don't win these contests. Do make sure you have your voter ID with you, by the way, if you go out. I mean, despite whatever else is happening with party politics, I just worry that every Reform UK candidate elected next week doesn't just mean the increased suffering of vulnerable members of their communities, because they will not lift a finger for them. They profit when people's lives are bad. So they're not going to do anything to make those lives better. But I also fear it would lead to an increase in violence as people who are racist and violent look at the situation and go, oh, people are electing them, therefore they agree with me. Even Conservatives almost never call for violence against their own communities. What message will this send to the thugs if they see someone elected who suggests literal civil war? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.